for value, but my hand is too strong enough to fold. So my plan is just to basically check call nearly any size, bet on, pot size bet or less. Um, and he actually bets about half pot here, as you'll see. And I go ahead and check call, and he shows up. He checks behind the river and shows up with pocket nines, which I think is a pretty good way for him to play it by flatting the flop and betting the turn for value, and then checking river. I'm not sure if there's value in betting the river for him. It's pretty close, I think. Certainly with tens, he should bet the river for value there, even on the king. So we'll talk about a little. Let's talk about pre-flop ranges from the big blind a little bit. What I'm three betting, what I'm flatting. Generally, my re-raising range from out of position generally is comprised of strong hands, which I think are ahead of calling ranges and dominate a fair amount of his calling range. So that would include stuff like pocket nines plus, ace jack plus, sometimes ace 10 suited, and king queen almost always, and lots of times king jack. I'll extend here for a second. So beyond that range, usually the rest of my range is complete semi bluffs pre-flop, and I generally select hands to bluff with pre-flop that are just barely not good enough to flat. So I look at my range for flatting and what hands are basically just beneath that range. So usually that's like unsuited connectors like 8-7 off, 7-6 off, 6-5 off, and also like suited kings, maybe king 7 suited on down to maybe king 4 suited, as well as ace X off hands such as ace deuce, ace 3, ace 4, and ace 5 off. Oftentimes I'm re-raising those, and I'll get into that why I'm re-raising those hands a little bit lately, besides them being just not good enough to flat. Also, I often re-raise small suited connectors like 6-5 suited and such, and also suited one gappers, especially like 6-4 suited, 5-7 suited, and sometimes some middling suited hands like 10-7 suited, 9-6 suited, that type of stuff. This king 5 offhand on the left, I'll extend again actually, is pretty much just a trash 3-bet that I throw in from time to time. It's not really standard. It's just kind of for the hell of it, just to, especially early on in the match, to see how he's going to be responding to 3-bets. So far we only have 25 hands, or 50 hands about, and I'm really not sure exactly how he is going to be responding to 3-bets. So I'll do it with a little higher frequency early on. On the right, and sorry, on the board on the left, the board's just too coordinated to see bet. On the board on the right, I flatted with ace 10 off pre, which is pretty standard, and check call the flop, thinking with that dry flop, I have the best hand very often, and my equity is pretty good. And I also have 2 overcards to the second pair. And I think I make a slight mistake on the river here by checking. I think it's actually much better to bet for value here, given that when he checks behind the turn on that board pairing turn, he often, his range is mostly comprised of like air, obviously, but besides air, it's mostly comprised of maybe pocket pairs, in between like a 4 and a 9, possibly ace highs, and possibly like very low queens, like queen deuce, queen 3, queen 4, queen 5, all queens that he doesn't think he can bet for value on the turn, as well as some hands like king 10, possibly even jack 10 maybe. All of these aren't necessarily certainties, but he's going to show up with these some percentage of the time. So what I'm trying to say is when I get to the river, I don't think he's going to be bluffing that card all that often, because my hand, when I check the river, looks an awful lot like, a weak queen, like maybe queen 8 suited, something like that. Um, and also that 10 hits a fair portion of my range too. King 10, Jack 10, that type of stuff I can certainly show up with on the river. 10-8. And all those hands, if he has the 10 himself, he's pretty much always going to be checking behind. So I think I need to bet the river for value because I'm going to lose the same amount versus a queen if I check or bet, and I'll be gaining more versus a 10. And I don't think it's a river that he's going to be bluffing all that often, although it's possible. But I think I made a slight mistake there and probably should have let out the river for value to get some value from 10x, which we'll check behind. With a weaker 10, if I had something like 10-8, it's probably better to check. So, ace-x suited out of position is a hand I pretty much always flat and never re-raise. The reason being is that I don't think it has enough value to re-raise, and I don't think it's a particularly strong semi-bluff. I think it has much more value in calling and playing flops post-flop. So it also balances my flattening range a little bit by giving me, some ace-high hands that will allow me to attack ace-high boards like this one, which is exactly what I do by check raising here. And I think the main reason this check raise can be good is because it looks so full of shit to be check raising this board. Most of my strong ace hands I'm re-raising pre-flop, so a check raise mostly looks like air or a flush draw or a gut shot. And for that reason, I go ahead and check the turn to try to let some of his floats bet, and also because, betting on the heart looks fairly strong, and my hand is kind of medium-ish strength, strong strength. But on the river, when he checks behind the turn, on the river, I think most of his hands have showdown value, and a large percentage of them aren't going to bet the river themselves. So, seeing as how I think I'm a favorite versus his calling range, I go ahead and bet the river, and he does pay me off with weak ace, which is pretty much just a cooler for him. That check raise, flop, check turn, and bet river line from me is a little bit see-through, I think, but I'm not necessarily worrying about it at these stakes. It is pretty hard for me to show up with a bluff there, but like I said, at these stakes, I'm not too worried about it. Even at mid stakes, most of the time, I'm not too worried about it. People just don't fold anything anymore, so it doesn't really. Lots of times, it often doesn't matter how see-through your lines are versus medium strength or weak players. They just call down regardless. So queen 10 off is another one of those hands where I think it has too much value to turn into a semi-bluff and not enough value to re-raise for value, so I flat call. And on the river here on the right, my hand still has a fair amount of showdown value, so I'm just going to check it down. The strategy of raising 100% from the button is not really widely accepted, I don't think, by a lot of people yet. And it's not necessarily true that it's for sure the best strategy, but I think it does pretty well versus a wide variety of counter strategies, and the reason for that is that if the player chooses to play pretty tight from his big blind, and by tight I mean if he folds more than 67.5% of his 62.5% of his big blind range, then I show an automatic profit with my worst hands just by the money I pick up pre-flop. If he defends wider than that, though, if he's defending 40% of hands or more, oftentimes I am going to be losing money with the bottom of my range, with the 7 deuces off, the 8-3 offs, all those very, very poor hands. But because he's defending such a wide range, I'm often going to be more than making up for that loss with the money I make from my very strong hands in my range. So the value I pick up